and to meet his wife Maria, and to hear the speeches about his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, the work he's done with the community, and his cowboy brethren coming to spend a moment with him. It was also wonderful to see that the community took great care in designing and building his casket, draping it with a Thunderbird blanket, flanked by his headdress and his staff, and his eldest son standing guard, ensuring his father's safe passage to the other side. Since then, I've attended the Aboriginal Awareness Days in Redwood Meadows. At that time, there was a call for volunteers for the powwow in the summer. I was delighted to be able to attend and be a volunteer at that. What hasn't, sorry, I'll backtrack because I know you guys were already sent our information. I'm a businesswoman, I'm a journeyman electrician, and I'm an artist as well. So in going to the powwow and volunteering, I was given the task of signing up all the young children for their dances. And it really was just, it was a thrill for me because as an artist, I've done a series of works on Native dancers. And their names are Harvey Moon, Summer Cloud Walker, and Prairie Thunder. So it was quite a delight to see all these young faces just eager to get out there and perform. From there, I went to a speech evening at Redwood Meadows a couple weeks ago, put on by Laurie Antonov, who works in the community. He has been an educator and a consultant across Alberta with interfacing with the First Nations here in Alberta. And she talked about Treaty 7, and at the end of it, she gave us the ingredients to make our talking stick. And I brought my talking stick this evening. This morning. These are very long days. Anyways, I would like to talk about my talking stick. As she explained that the talking stick had the 4 colors of the 4 corners of the world, plus I added my blue bead for the water. Talked about wanting to have an eagle feather in it. I put on this Swainson hawk feather that I found earlier this summer that had come off a bird, and I had kept it at my back door all summer, and I put that into my talking stick. The other part of the talking stick was to have something from a rabbit to represent the softness of one's heart. Instead, I actually put in the fur from my little Japanese chin who passed away last year, and this was the last combing I did on him before he passed away. And he was just the softest, sweetest animal out there, so I thought this would remind me to keep my heart soft. The other element that was part of this talking stick was to have some fur from the bison. As I don't have any access to a bison, a buffalo, I instead decided that I would take a tail hair from my horse who passed away very suddenly last year, and I saved some of her tail hair, and the hospital braided me up a heart shape with her hair, and it's in here to remind me of her spirit and the spirit of these wonderful animals that roamed the prairies. I also want to say that in her passing, she passed very suddenly and we didn't have a chance to say goodbye. And 3 months after she passed away, I was at a concert with my husband at a classical guitar concert, and one of the composers started playing a piece of music, and at the very beginning of that piece of music, I was overwhelmed by the tsunami of emotion that came at me, and it turned out it was the spirit of my horse. Normally I would not think that this could happen in life, and it was a first in my lifetime. And she came rushing into my being, excited to tell me that she was so happy to have found her way back to me, and she didn't know how she got to me. And she just wanted to tell me goodbye because she knows we didn't say goodbye. And she talked about how much she loved me, and she talked about that she's with all the other animals. At the end of the concert, I went and asked the gentleman who did the piece of music, what was that piece of music written for, because I understood in her talking to me that it was the spirit of an animal that brought her to me. And when I asked him what he wrote that piece of music about, he said he'd written it for his dog who died of a neurological disorder. The dog would always lie at his feet while he composed, and I knew throughout that entire experience that it was from his animal that my beautiful house came back to me. So this will be with me always, remembering that very profound emotional experience I had. I also want to say that if I am blessed and privileged to be your MP, this stick will come with me to Ottawa, and it will always represent my truth to all of you and to all I speak with, because that's all I've ever done in my life, is spoken my truth. I was just on Monday to the Awatan. Sorry, a little emotional for my house. I walked with my fellow sisters this Monday at the Awatan Healing Lodge's Sisters in Spirit walk to remember the missing and murdered Aboriginal woman. As a woman who myself by the age of 17 had already experienced verbal violence, physical violence, and sexual violence, I find it completely unacceptable that this country stands by and allows any woman, let alone the Aboriginal community, to undergo such violence and not take it in hand. Now, you wanted us to talk a little bit about platform. As you are aware, Elizabeth May talked to the Assembly of First Nations and was the only leader who received a standing ovation. The Green Party is fully behind the First Nations becoming self-determination, and so I hope we'll get into more policy in the questions. I don't want to take up too much more time here because the questions that you've given us will certainly cover the policies that the Green Party brings forward. Thank you very much, and thank you so much for putting this on. This is so important.
Wow, that was very good. You know, the mediator handbook says the mediator can't be biased. So you got to be non-partial. But I'm just really overwhelmed with the candidates, all of you here, right? Because it's very important that you took the time out in your campaign trail to come speak with us. So it's I'm biased towards all of you, okay? I would like to introduce, from the Christian Heritage Party, Mark Singerland. Please make your way to the podium.
Good morning. It's a real privilege for me to be here on the Tsuut'ina Nation. I am an educator. I'm a high school teacher and the principal of a school just west of Lethbridge. And I have to say my main purpose in being here today is to learn. I am not as aware as I probably should be, and I think this is a failing for me personally, but it's a failing of us as a nation. And I know seeing the Alberta school curriculum, now as a principal I don't teach social studies myself, but I get into social studies classrooms. And I know that the curriculum now incorporates much more about Aboriginal perspectives, and it's so important for all of Canadian citizens to realize what has gone before and our obligations. Too often I think we consider treaty matters, the promises that have been made in the past, as something that is a First Nations matter. But in fact, it's Canada that has made promises as well. We haven't lived up to our obligations. And some of the resources that have been put together, I'm not sure, maybe even some of you were involved in creating something called Walking Together. Interviews with elders and information about the various First Nations in Alberta. It's an incredible resource, very valuable for all our young people and our citizens to hear more about your culture, and I hope to be able to do that here today. Like I said, I'm not here with solutions. I think anyone who says here is the answer to our problems is fooling you, is fooling themselves. To find one solution that will fit the needs of a nation like your own on the outskirts of a large city, and also the needs of a remote community in the far north. Those needs are so different. And so what I've said to all of the forums we've been to so far, what we stand for as a Christian Heritage Party is limited federal government. People closest to the issues have the best grasp on the needs of their communities, and so they have to be given the tools to meet those needs. And now the federal government has only limited roles, but dealing with First Nations is one of them. It's something they haven't done particularly well. And the place of First Nations people in Canada, the Indian Act treating you as wards of the state, that's an anachronism that has to go. Where we go from there is something we need to build in dialogue, but certainly the current situation cannot continue. With rights come responsibilities. There must be restitution, recognition of what has gone before. There's also a need to move past blame and hatred on both sides and to work for a positive future. Trust has been broken. Calls for inquiries, calls for panels. The need for outsiders to be involved in the relationship between the government and First Nations is there because the government hasn't lived up to its obligations. They've betrayed that trust. And through communication, dialogue, that can be rebuilt. I know the Christian Heritage Party, we have principles that are common to First Nations principles. Principles like the sacredness of life, stewardship of the land and our accountability to the Creator, the wisdom of elders, the value of family, the value of every individual, and the need to make them able to contribute, to care for others in the community. And our vision should strive for full participation for all Canadians. And I look forward to hearing from you and sharing with you more about how we can move to that positive future. Thank you so much for having us.
That was a very good platform and introduction. Thank you, Mark. Can I please ask Tanya McPherson from the Liberal Party to make your way to the podium? Did you bring your Harley today?
No.
Oh, okay.
I was wondering if I could offer a gift to Daryl Whitney on behalf of the Chief. I'm Tanya McPherson, and I know that the natives have held up their part of the treaty. When you agreed to share the grass with us, you were sharing, you were giving as a people, and I feel that we have been greedy and that we haven't given back. And we felt it more strongly even in the last few years. And perhaps that's why at this point I feel like it's all over now. I feel like we are going to have resolution, and that it doesn't matter which government comes into power, we are going to find that here in Canada, and we are going to have reconciliation. It's just an overwhelming feeling, and I feel ashamed as a Canadian that we haven't done it much sooner, and that we have been greedy. I go to India and I meditate with a guru. And my guru always asks me about the native spirituality, because she says she believes it's very much the same as it is in India and in Tibet. And I believe that to be true now. I understand. And I just want to say that the Liberal Party really reaches out. I know that I've heard Justin say that he wants to take action on all 94 calls to action, and I believe him when he says that, because I believe that there's a very strong feeling in all of Canada that needs to happen.
Yeah, if some of you noticed how slow I am getting to the podium, it's because I rode my horse here. It's got a bad tranny. Anyways, we'll get back to the forum. I would like to ask the NDP candidate is Allison Thompson. Please make your way to the podium.
Thanks, Kevin. Usually I don't need a microphone. I've got a pretty booming voice, but this morning I think I do. I want to thank you for inviting me back to Treaty 7 land. It's my pleasure. This is my third time on the campaign trail, being here and being actually in this room. I also want to recognize the elders that are here, and the community leaders, the people who have organized us all to attend, and especially the youth. I've met one of the youth already on the campaign trail, and I know that as we're being taped, there's many more of you in the audience. And that means a great deal to me. I also want to acknowledge that you're being very honorific, saying we're taking time out of our campaign trail to be here. But my story is a little bit different, and so the nation has prepared several questions, and we can go through, I think, a lot of the NDP policy through the questions. But I'd like to share with you how I ended up at this podium. It has a lot to do with First Nations. So I'm actually a very new politician. I joined, I guess, the race and the party in July, but for the past 8 years, I've been a counterparty to the government, and I haven't really liked what I've seen. I run a National Renewable Energy Association, and we deal mainly with geothermal energy, although we support wind and solar and biomass as well. And so what brought me into the election was climate change. But what I've been trying to do through my career for the past 8 years is actually just make Canada a better place through protecting our water, through protecting our environment, through caring about climate change. We all live here. My campaign slogan is "Foothills for all." A lot of people who've interviewed me for the newspapers have jumped on that and said, oh yeah, because of the urban people in Okotoks and the rural people down in the south. And I've always corrected them to say, no, there's also 3 First Nations on the land, and they were here first. This is a Foothills for all. And you're right, this is an opportunity. It's an historic election to be reflective of everybody in Canada, everybody in the foothills. So I just want to talk a little bit about Idle No More. That was a First Nations movement that started when the Conservative Party passed an omnibus bill, and we woke up one morning and 98% of our water was unprotected. We're all drinking water right now. I mean, water is in us. These things are not okay to take away from the Canadian people. My personal work with First Nations is through renewable energy. And so, for example, I'm working with the Acho Dene Co, so these are the Northwest Territories and the Yukon Dene, on providing them with opportunities and alternatives to diesel fuel. Right now we fly in diesel fuel, we have people addicted to diesel, and it's polluting their environment. It's also very noisy, and it doesn't do anything for food security, where we can bring in renewable energy, create more jobs, and actually use the heat from renewable energy to have greenhouses. Germany does these types of greenhouses. It takes 15 days to drill a geothermal well and creates 150 jobs and creates thousands of tons of tomatoes and cucumbers and the things we want to eat. And we know how to do this in Canada, but our federal government is keeping us from doing that because they want to keep us addicted to being beholden to them. A lot of my day, as I was saying, be it on the campaign trail or in my career, is right now, since December 2013, I've been a very, very public and media figure fighting on behalf of the Treaty 8 First Nations. So here we are in Treaty 7. Treaty 8 First Nations right now, which is half of northern BC and also northern Alberta, is having imposed upon them by the British Columbia Liberals and the federal Conservatives a big dam. A dam called Site C. They don't even know that they need this power. They have had what they called meaningful consultation. They got to check off that box. None of the First Nations have agreed it's been meaningful. There are alternatives, there are energy alternatives that First Nations agree with, and they're not being listened to. There's been 7 court cases, I think 4 at the federal level and 2 or 3 at the provincial level. And it's really quite frightening, actually, that even though there's a treaty in place, that they're in court. They shouldn't have to be in court. A treaty is a treaty. That takes precedence. And yet in court, they're actually losing. There's something very wrong with the way that we represent treaties right now, and it needs to be fixed. They shouldn't have to be in court. I shouldn't have to spend precious time promoting new sources of energy to somebody who doesn't want to hear about them because they're stuck 100 years ago. They're stuck building technology from 50 and 100 years ago. British Columbia also has many First Nations who are not under treaty. And I think the approach in my life is that we participate in negotiations like there already is a treaty, because we know the treaties are coming. And so why not just start from day one having respectful communication? And so we work with the Kitsillas First Nation. They're on the coast by Prince Rupert. And with the Sip First Nation, they're near the Kamloops area, in the Shuswap First Nation. And when we go into the communities talking about renewable power, the first thing we do is talk about the agreement. So with the Occi-Denico in the Northwest Territories, the agreement was 51% owned by Occi-Denico, 49% by the geothermal company. For the Kitsillas First Nation, it's a 50-50 agreement. So right away, we're not talking about, I think they call them EBAs, economic benefit agreements, all these things that the government wants you to have with contracts. If you just start with respect and feelings of equality and feelings of who actually owns that resource, then you get so much further ahead working together and everyone comes out a winner. One of the expressions I've learned as a parent, I have a 4-year-old myself, they said to go fast, you have to go slow. That kind of confused me at first because of course I'm always trying to hurry my toddler around, but to go fast, you have to go slow. That's what meaningful consultation is, making sure everybody's voice is heard and at the table. Another interesting idea in how the First Nations has influenced me is I want to expand the word to Indigenous peoples. So the NDP is proud to have in Alberta 50% of our candidates are women. 22 candidates across Canada are Indigenous peoples. That's an historic record for Indigenous peoples running in the election, and I hope they all get elected. But Indigenous peoples are actually peoples who are outside. Thank you. They're my colleagues, I'm proud of them too. Indigenous peoples, of course, are not just in Canada, they're all around the world. And so what I'm wearing today is Punamo. It's the green rock from New Zealand. And because I work in the international geothermal and renewable energy world, I find I get a lot more welcome from other countries who have already implemented the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples. And so I'm already working in the world where the UN Declaration is a law. It's not a law in Canada. The Conservatives don't agree with implementing that. And I'm living proof of how working together works for everybody and not putting people in silos and trying to take advantage or trying to take people to court. Why are we spending money being in court? We can solve these issues together and we can all be further ahead. Of course, as a woman, the murdered and missing Indigenous woman, 1,200 people, it's unacceptable on so many levels. Our government will call an inquiry in the first 100 days, and that's not even soon enough, I'm sure. We need to get to the bottom of this and make sure it doesn't keep happening, because 1,200 is a frightfully large number, but it's just going to keep growing. It's probably larger right now as we stand here. The other thing to think about is education. As a Canadian, again, I'm a new politician, I've learned a lot through the election period, and I've been shocked as well to find out that kids growing up on First Nations schools, they go to schools there, they're not getting the same education that my son is. And why is that? Because we have these artificial and punitive caps on education. Why are we treating Canadian citizens any differently? We're all living in this country. We all have access to the same information. But somehow we've decided that some people don't matter as much. They get less funding. These things are Canadian issues. They're First Nations issues, but they're Canadian issues as well. And there's a great many of us who don't agree with them. I was mentioning this is my 3rd time here, and I really do appreciate being back. The other night I was in the Many Horses room, which is just at the back of the building. And what I tried to do with my campaign, it's a very long campaign, 78 days. I wanted it to mean something more than just advance polls or election day. So I ran a speaker series. My speaker series highlighted many things, such as affordable housing, shelters for women, violence against women, renewable energy, healthy food, climate change, and First Nations. My speaker on the past weekend in the Many Horses room, she's not being funded by the government, but she's an Inuit researcher, and she goes up to the Arctic, and she's actually leading, if you can believe this, a snorkeling relay, not even diving, but snorkeling, thousands of kilometers of Northwest Passage to bring awareness to the sea pack ice in the Inuit communities. And so that's very exciting for me, that we have strong leaders who are willing to work even outside the government to get the job done and to be reflective of climate change, Inuit communities, and attention that needs to be happening. It's not making its way to the news every night, but these are newsworthy items. and the NDP is here to make sure that they're taken care of. Thank you.
Wow, what a great panel of candidates. It's really great. How about a round of applause for all your candidates? What's very encouraging about today is I get to see a world where women are taking charge and they're running, actually, right? That doesn't hold anything bad against Mark. It's just as we're seeing that that there's starting to become an equal ground in Canada, and where, you know, it doesn't matter what gender you are, and it really matters on your beliefs, and that's where I'm very kind of in awe of what's going on today. We will get into the question period now. Before I do that, I'd really like to, as well as talk about the candidates, I really like to tip my hat to the department, the legislative department, for putting and promoting this, as well as Chief and Council. If you had kind of a look around at staff, they're very young. And when I look into the room, it's the young and the wiser. Young and the wiser that are out there today, and they want to form Canada. So I'm very impressed, and thank you for coming out today. One thing that I was thinking about is that I don't know if I introduced myself to the crowd. I assumed in my egotistical piggery that you all know who I was, right? But if you don't know who I am out there, for me, my name is Kevin Littlelight. I'm a Tsuut'ina Nation member, and I was charged with the honor of being a mediator today. I have a real lengthy bio, but I'll meet you guys individually and let you know about what's going on with me. And I beaded this jacket all night for you guys. Yeah, rode my horse, dusted the hat off. Okay. We're going to get to the question period, I believe. Do we have a Roman mic for the questions? Okay, right there we have. Please, when you, here's the ground rules. You have 5 minutes to answer. Are we going to have individual questions for them, or is the whole panel going to answer the questions? The whole panel. So the whole panel will have to ask the questions. We'll start from Mark on the way down this way. Yeah, and then we'll rotate every question, and it'll start this way and that way, and we'll go from there. For the guests that are asking the questions, can you please state your name and kind of rise so we can see? You can't really see behind the water canisters and things like that. So we'll go into, you have 5 minutes per person, and you'll be timed, and we'll just keep an eye on Vanessa, and she'll give you the... You can't take that pen back, that's mine. You ever see Dances with Wolves when that left his cowboy hat on the plains and that Indian took it? You can't take that. You have to give me something now. All right. Please state your name and ask your question, please.
Good morning. I'm Allison Heavenfire. I'm actually the Legislative Procedures Technical Services Director. My first question is, should the government increase environment regulations on businesses in Canada?
Starting with me, I forgot the instructions already, sorry. Should government increase environmental regulations? That's a very, very, very broad question, and so I'm going to answer with a yes and a no. In general, the government, I think, interferes, if anything, too much in the proceedings of business, individuals, small businesses, and entrepreneurs across Canada are strangled by red tape and regulations. And much more could be done in local regions, in communities, to improve the lives and to improve the economies of local areas if there was less regulatory burden. That said, there are some things that should not be negotiable, and among those the protection of the environment and the health and safety of people are among them. And so there are certainly specific areas where environmental regulations, checks, follow-up have been removed or minimized, and those are exactly the kinds of places where the government does have a role that they have reneged on, and those specific items should certainly be brought back into place. So I hope I've answered your question. It's kind of, in general, I'm against regulations, but in the few places where they need to be strong and they need to be upheld. We need monitoring. We heard last night in Pincher Creek, passionate story about the war on science that is taking place, the funding that has been cut for environmental monitoring, for how do we know that our policies are working if we can't even check what the results are? And so that's a place that we definitely need to do better.
It's for these reasons of the environment that I am running. I just woke up earlier in May and realized that I had to take responsibility and I couldn't watch anymore. I remember watching or listening as, I believe it was 2011, I'm not sure, when Harper said he wasn't going to test the Athabasca River anymore because Alberta Environment was doing it. Now, the warning bells just went off in my head because I know that Alberta Environment is just strapped for people. Their budget has been slashed. They hardly have enough people working there. They can barely do the tests. And Harper said he wasn't going to, do any more testing. He was going to get rid of all the scientists. And no company, no government can do that without verifying that the testing is being done and that we really know what's going on. When I went to drop my son off at Acadia University in August, I spoke to Dr. Thomas Duck, and he let me know what the state of the environmental labs were in our country. He told me that basically all of the heads of departments of Environment Canada have been let go, and all of the senior scientists. There is only a junior staff left. He said that he's already been thinking in his mind, if he were asked for advice from a new government, he's hoping for a new government in October. And he said that in his mind he's already thinking about and formulating what he would tell a new government. And what he would say is there is no succession in Environment Canada. So the best thing to do, there's so many there are so many people who are so dedicated to Environment Canada that they would come back. We should offer them to come back and work again on contracts 2 or 3 years to train the junior people. The other thing is I've been in email contact with Dr. Peter Ross, who lost his lab of 55, and he was monitoring the health of the Pacific Ocean for us. Whenever a whale died, he would do the autopsy, do the toxicological data, the markers, so that he would know the health of the ocean, and he was monitoring it for us and for the world. He lost his job in 2012. The Vancouver Aquarium raised money to hire him back, with obviously a very small staff. The government has got rid of our Navigable Waters Act. We had it for 130 years, and everybody knew the permit process, everyone knew the regulations, what needed to happen in order to develop along Canada's waterways. And that was just thrown out by the Harper government. I just can't sit and watch that. We need to protect our even the fisheries. I know that he changed the Fisheries Act. We need to protect our waterways, and we need to protect the wildlife and the fisheries. We just can't let this go on. I just can't sit and watch this. I just want to be a participant in rebuilding our country, in reestablishing our ability to measure. You know, for instance, Canada is the gold standard for the ozone layer. We have the UV index that the world uses, we have 3 researchers who used to work for Environment Canada and no longer have jobs, that created the UV index that the world uses. We have 3 Brewer spectrophotometers that shine up at the Arctic, that hold the calibration for the world for the ozone layer measurement. And Harper fired all of the research scientists who were participating in that and running that calibration. The whole world was up in arms and told him he could not do that. He had to have a research scientist running that calibration.
1 minute, please.
So the whole world knows what we're doing to our environment and that we're not paying attention and that we don't care anymore. So, just lost my train of thought, sorry about that. Anyways, as a candidate, I would be very much making sure that we protect our environment, protect our land, protect the fish and the wildlife. And I know that this would be very important to you as well.
This is a really easy question for me and for the party. Of course, we should ask the companies to do more. I have over 20 years experience working for all the major oil companies in Canada, either for or with them, the utility companies across Canada. I've worked 2 years in the US and also internationally in the energy business. You know, even the US, where Canada used to look at them a long time ago as like they were so bad and we were so good, they're better than us. They subscribe to something called BAT, Best Available Technology. Best Available Technology means if you're using anything less than that, you're not doing as good as you can do. And what we're finding now is that there is no difference between the economy and the environment. That is a completely false choice, and what really has motivated me to run in this election. Harper is trying to convince people that it's okay to have polluted water, to have polluted air, because the economy is just so rocky. The economy is not rocking. The economy is suffering. People don't want to even trade with us anymore because we're such a bad actor on the world scene. I'll give you a local example. It's around coal. Ontario has now phased out coal. You know, many countries around the world aren't using coal. They're phasing it out, or they've just gone right to renewable energy. Under the Conservative government, they've grandfathered in coal and allowing it to produce for another 50 years or so. Alberta has the highest emissions cumulative, so all the emissions together in Canada, Alberta has the most for coal emissions because we're using it for electricity. You know, those light bulbs don't care where the electron came from. They could come from renewable energy. We are the sunniest province. We have the most wind in southern Alberta in this foothills riding. We have thousands, and by thousands I mean like hundreds of thousands of wells that have been drilled in this province that are hot enough to produce electricity. We could literally turn off coal just like Ontario did right away. But I want to leave you with, when we don't do better for the environment, we're actually hurting ourselves. And so those coal companies right now that are being allowed to emit, they're costing us $300 million a year in health care. And so that's a provincial cost. But when the federal government cuts transfers to the provinces for health care, we're paying twice. We're paying with our health, we're paying with our taxes, and we're allowing the corporations to get away with it. This is not right. We can do better. Best available technology. People who work in the companies, they want to do the best available thing. They want to use all the brain power they have to do the right thing. There is no choice. There's no trade-off between the environment and the economy. We can do both. Sorry for the voice.
Her voice will quit out before the 5 minutes, so we'll be okay. So first of all, as I know your First Nations people put a lot of stock in names and what names mean, and my party I represent is the Green Party, and it's called the Green Party because we put Earth at the center of all of our decisions. So in the question of whether or not we should increase environmental regulations, we should always make appropriate regulations, environmental regulations, and that's what the Green Party is committed to. No matter what the legislation is, no matter what is put before us, if it affects our earth, we have to include that in whatever way is most appropriate for our earth. You have been the people who have protected this land for 15,000 years, and we need to protect it as vigorously as you have. Thank you.
Good morning. Dada Nastada, Size Kelsey Bigplume. I work in legislative procedures. My question I pose for you today is, what are your thoughts on the First Nations Financial Transparency Act?
So we'll start with Romy.
I actually want to be able to quote Elizabeth Mann what she said about this. Well, I will have to paraphrase. The whole basis for what the Green Party feels about the First Nations is that this is your nation and it's your call. This is funding that you've gotten. It really is totally dependent on how you want to deal with your finances. It's not for us from the outside to tell you whether to be transparent or not transparent. I, as an elected official with the Green Party, we have signed an agreement to be completely transparent in our use of monies that we get from the Canadian government and spend on your behalf. But your nation, in your right to have self-determination, your transparency, financial transparency is for you to decide upon.
The NDP was the only major party to vote against this act in Parliament. We don't think this is necessary. We think this is onerous. It's singling out the First Nations as somebody who needs to be treated with more kind of grandfatherly looking over your shoulder. This is not the way to have nation-to-nation respectful relationships. I was at the University of Calgary the other day in a debate on foreign aid, and one of the youth asked a question, and she was actually quite angry about it. And she was using examples saying, well, how are we going to make sure that the First Nations spend that money okay? And I changed the question. I said back to her that that's not even respectful the way you're asking the question. You don't understand what nation to nation means. And I'm just trying to encourage Canadians, be them youth or people who are older than us, to understand that everything we do has really been kind of slanted in a very negative way. First Nations, transparency, financial act. These things are not respectful. Why are we putting any more burden on one group than another? The NDP certainly puts the same financial burden upon us as we would expect anybody else, not more, not less. And so I'm really, myself, part of the conversation in having people change the way they view the world, the way they view Canada, the way they view everyone living in Canada. And I do agree, First Nations, this is your money and country as well. You have just as much right to talk about how the money is spent than somebody who's trying to give you some money to spend. So I'm looking forward to a new relationship.
I too agree that the First Nations Financial Transparency Act, you are responsible. You are the ones who are responsible for your own future and for your own present. So the government shouldn't be imposing a great deal of regulation on First Nations. I mean, it's supposed to be a respectful nation-to-nation dialogue, and I don't see why we should be imposing regulations.
The question of authority, transparency, whose job is it to be sure that funding is being provided? It's all mixed up, in fact, with the whole relationship between the Crown, the federal government, and First Nations. And I was glad to hear from a number of you at the beginning, and I think from First Nations more generally, that you're getting involved in federal politics. The two systems of government have to interrelate, and our Indian Act right now does not allow for that respectful relationship. So even the ability of the federal government to impose this is questionable. And certainly the way it was done, the motivations, the idea that we can't trust these people is fundamentally wrong. And especially when you compare this to how they treat other groups. Many of you will have heard of Brent Rathcaber. He's running a very strong campaign as an independent now, but he left the Conservative caucus. What he was trying to do was introduce a much lower level of accountability for public servants in Ottawa. Right now you can go, because of the Financial Transparency Act, you can go and look up the wages and perks of all of the council members and chiefs. You can't do that for people who are making $300,000–400,000 in Ottawa. So if there's going to be transparency, I'm all for that, but let's please have it be fair and not single out people for unfair attention that there is not even an authority to impose.
Question, where do we have? Stephen?
Stephen Crowchild. I just want to say thank you again for sharing your time today. A lot of all the questions that I prepared were for the incumbent member of parliament, John. And obviously, it's my opinion that it's kind of arrogant and disrespectful that he didn't find attendance at today's forum important. So I'm just gonna say that there's no proportional representation in Canada, and that's the reality right now. And I understand that you all come from different parties and you all have very different platforms, but one thing that I see common is the desire for change within all parties. So I wanted to ask you, what's your views on strategic voting in the Foothills riding and across Canada as well? Thanks.
I'm going to ask Alison Thompson to start, and then roll me, and then back to Mark, and then deal with a Liberal candidate.
So the NDP is strongly in favor of proportional representation. If proportional representation, if we win, that is the first thing we're going to be bringing in. So this will be the last election where everybody's vote doesn't count. This proportional representation is a real opportunity for, unfortunately, the next election. We have to get through this one. We need to vote in a party who actually believes in proportional representation. But the NDP is not one to wait around. So as I was mentioning, there's 43% of all candidates are women across Canada for the NDP. 50% of them are women in Alberta alone, and 22 First Nation or Indigenous peoples. We're trying to reflect proportional representation as much as possible while we can. But strategic voting in the Foothills, and again, these are things I've learned in the election cycle, but as a Canadian as well. Under this Fair Elections Act, a lot is called the Unfair Elections Act because it's restricting people's ability to more easily vote. One of the things that's been taken away in April is there used to be a per vote subsidy for parties. So for example, if we voted for other people sitting at this table, even if they didn't win, their party would receive funding. And that's been in place for a long time. It's actually helped some of the smaller parties get a stronger hold. That per vote subsidy no longer exists. So when you cast a vote right now and that person doesn't win, that party doesn't win, you're not actually helping them at a party level the way you used to in the past. So I think strategic voting is really, really important. Myself, I'd like to position myself as, given that I have such a green background, that you don't have to make a trade-off between Mother Earth and the NDP. I'm in the NDP. I'm going to be an important part of the NDP's education, even within their own party, about what they can do about climate change and water and the environment. But what we want to encourage people to do is, voting is important, but sometimes we can't change everything all at once. Proportional representation is for the next election because we need to vote somebody in right now who actually will bring in proportional representation. And we need to understand that voting for certain parties right now may not actually help them the way it has in the past. And that's because of Stephen Harper's Unfair Elections Act. I don't think that's right, I don't agree with it, but those are the facts. And I think that's why the issue of strategic voting has been more in the news for this election. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm going to first pick up on what you talked about with Mr. John Barlow not being here in attendance. I too had to question that. He has, as he indicated in his email to you, that he's going to be attending the funeral as the MP down in Blairmore, and the death of the very unfortunate and tragic death of the Haley and her father Terry down in Blairmore, the murder that took place a couple of weeks ago. His campaign manager indicated to me yesterday that he would go to that funeral, but he said that he would be going there as an individual, not as an MP. In his email to you, he did indicate that he was going there in an official capacity. I also want to point out that having attended the state funeral, I was very aware that there wasn't a Conservative representative who came and honored your community at the passing of your state leader, and I found that very unfortunate. So it only goes to show how important it is for all of you to get out and vote. The Green Party, one of our 6 tenets of our party is proportional representation, and as with the NDP, we will be playing a part in the next coalition government that's going to be formed. Our first demand is for proportional representation, and that's just a basic human right we should all have, is that each one of our votes count, and we all have a voice at the table. Because in my life, when I have a discussion with my husband, we always come up with a better decision when both of us work on it, instead of just one of us telling the other one what to do. And I think as Canadians, we're going to work infinitely better with all of our voices at the table. Now, on the subject of strategic voting, I personally wish that we could vote. I want you to vote for a party, not against a party. But I also understand that it's a big vote splitting. Strategic voting is a conversation and a method of voting that has been very loudly spoken about this year. And I would direct you to go to the Strategic Voting Canada website, where they have gone through every riding in Canada with their methodologies to indicate which candidate you should be voting for if you choose to vote strategically. I will also just get right to the point. If you go to that website, they're calling for the Green to be voted strategically in this riding. I also want to just tell you that that would not be a bad vote strategically. It would be a great vote, no matter what, because I and the Green Party will make a huge difference, and we're going to be making the hugest difference for your community. Thank you.
Please pass the microphone to Mark, please.
Thank you. The Christian Heritage Party, on an official level, and myself individually, have been involved with Fair Vote Canada for many years. The CHP since its inception in 1988. Fair Vote Canada is the main national organization that's been working for proportional representation. We're strong proponents of that. We sometimes are accused that that's for our own interest, because we are a small party, unlikely to get enough votes in any riding under the current system to elect an MP. Whereas we are the only pro-life party in Canada, there are people across this country for whom life is rightly recognized as the most fundamental of our rights. And the protection of human life from conception on is something that overrides all other concerns. If you don't get to be born, you can't take advantage of the economy, you can't enjoy the environment. Life is the most fundamental right. The number of people who vote for that is spread across Canada. If we had proportional representation, we would be able to bring that message more effectively. And certainly that's a part of it. But just in terms of fairness, proportional representation is the only way that works. There's no way that a party should be able to get 1/3 of the votes in the country, more than half of the seats, and thereby 100% of the power for a few people in the Prime Minister's office. That's undemocratic, and it's unfair. That needs to change. That said, I'm strongly against strategic voting. I understand the motivations for it. I understand why people would do that. But in my opinion, the only wasted vote is a vote for something you don't believe in. You need to look for a party whose values align with yours, a party who can speak for you. Whether or not they're elected, of course that's influential, but seeing a number of votes, for instance, for the Green Party, even if that MP isn't elected, the importance of that issue is clear. That's something that the elected MP can use as leverage. So a vote for the Christian Heritage Party is a vote for the fundamental moral principles that made our country great. And whatever MP is elected, can use that to take to their party and say, this is something that matters to voters in my riding, you have to pay attention to these issues. So that's my take. I don't think strategic voting is wise. I don't think it's, our responsibility is not to choose the government, it's to vote according to our conscience for our one vote.
I've been spending a lot of time on the doors. I've been door knocking a lot, talking to a lot of people. And what I'm finding is a lot of people want change. There are some people who still say they're conservatives, and they always wish me luck. I take that as a good sign. But they don't realize what a small number they are, and that's what I find to be very surprising myself as well. You know, First Nations, I know that Harper budgeted money for your education funds, things like that, and left $1 billion basically sitting in the bank account unspent. He did that to the veterans as well, another $1 billion. He muzzled the scientists. I think he's done something to everybody. So it's almost clear across the board that people are looking for change. People tell me that they're going to vote strategically this time round. You know, I know that the Liberal Party also wants to bring in proportional representation, and we want to implement it within the first 18 months. Yeah, I just hope, I guess the sense I get in this riding is people really want change, and they want the Harper government out. So I hope that if people are voting strategically, that it's successful, because I'm exactly the same way. I just want Harper out.
Thank you, Tanya. Yes, we could have a 5-minute break for the candidates, please. I'll leave you with motivation. Whoever wins, know that I voted for you. 5-minute break, ladies and gentlemen. Please start in the time.